Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the first webinar of our five-part series, Equipment Considerations in Cover Crop Systems. My name is Olivia Cayuet, and I am a Soil Health Program Manager with the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Erin Gundy and Anne-Marie Calabro, who work at the Soil Health Institute. We three support the education component of Farmers for Soil Health. The purpose of this series is to provide farmers, crop advisors, and conservation professionals and others interested with information related to equipment considerations in cover crop systems. We're specifically focusing on spring cash crop planting following the use of cover crops. Farmers for Soil Health, or FSH, is one of many USDA-funded Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodity projects. FSH is a collaborative initiative of commodity organizations, the United Soybean Board, the National Corn Growers Association, and the National Pork Board, with a goal to increase cover crop adoption. This specific project provides an incentive to farmers who are new to planting cover crops or who have been planting cover crops for many years, as well as offering a sustainability marketplace to connect the farmer to the supply chain. State-level commodity organizations working across 20 states, stretching from North Dakota to the East Coast, are involved with FSH to provide local technical assistance and outreach programming. FSH has also developed a website full of resources and information helpful to any of you working with farmers or if you are a farmer or landowner. You can learn more about FSH at farmersforsoilhealth.com, and I will drop that link in the chat for us momentarily. And for your information, the deadline for enrollment of 2023 fall planted cover crops has been extended to March 15th. Then enrollment for 2024 fall planted cover crops will open in March as well. During today's presentation, we will be discussing equipment considerations in various locations, ranging from where Barry is located in Indiana to Steve's farm in Pennsylvania. Then in the next 4 parts in this series, we will be joined by farmers as we watch their videos about equipment setups in Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa, along with an open discussion. That'll be happening every Thursday through March 14th at the same time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Lastly, a few items about today's event. The presentation is being recorded, and after the webinar series concludes March 14th, a final email will be sent with the webinar recordings and final feedback survey. As questions come up throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A. You can upvote questions that you'd like to prioritize that we can cover live. And if you'd like captions on, those can be enabled by clicking the 3 dots on your toolbar and navigating to the captions. Be sure to hang on till the end for information related to the one Certified Crop Advisor Continuing Education Unit for attending this webinar. With that being said, I'm excited to introduce our guests. We're joined today by 3 professionals in the soil health space, Dr. Abby Witt, Barry Fisher, and Steve Groff. Abby, who works with Syngenta, is encouraging soil health adoption and is founder of WIC Consulting, LLC. She'll moderate today's discussion with Barry and Steve. Barry is a retired NRCS soil health specialist and farmer in Central Indiana. Steve is a farmer, author, and consultant located in Eastern Pennsylvania. Abby, I'll hand it over to you, Barry and Steve, for more introduction and to kick off our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. This is such a great opportunity to talk about equipment, I think, which all of us love to think about how equipment can be modified or set to get the best possible success out of using these soil health practices. And So my background a little bit deeper is that I was with NDSU, or North Dakota State University, for about 12 years, working directly with growers on adoption of soil health practices. And I always think about working alongside growers. This is a joint learning effort because nobody has all the answers. And so that's kind of what I want to start with. But we have some good ideas of where to start and places that we can provide information and share experiences for reducing risk of new practice adoption. So I guess maybe I'll turn it over to Steve now for his deeper introduction.
Well, hi, Abby. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. I have my grandson, Liam, with us today. I got a question for Liam. Do you have earthworms in your garden? Oh, he's shy on me. But I'm trying to train these grandkids, what soil health is all about and cover crops and everything. So if you don't mind, he'll join us here for today. So I'm Steve Groff from Southeastern Pennsylvania. I'm a third generation farmer, and I started no-till 42 years ago. My, how time flies. And I've been learning ever since. I think we would all agree that it's a journey, not so much a destination that we're on here. So, I'm more of a vegetable farmer, and so I've pioneered a lot of things in that front with no-till and cover crops. And we might be talking about roller crimping. That's something I've been doing now for 28 years. So again, continuing to learn and happy to be here today.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And good to see you, Liam. Maybe we'll find out if you have earthworms later. I bet you do. And Barry, let's go to you for a little bit deeper introduction.
Well, had a long history and career with Natural Resources Conservation Service, served in capacity of area agronomist, state agronomist, district conservationist, conservation tillage specialist, and then finally soil health specialist, and then wound up my career on the National Soil Health Division, and where we served. My team covered from North Dakota to Kansas all the way to Ohio, and at the very end, we even included Pennsylvania. So covered most of the center part of the country, most of my career, and then our farm here is in West Central Indiana, where we've operated a cash grain and livestock farm for about 23 years, and it's been continuous no-till and cover crops for that entire period of time. So I guess my first experience with planting into cover crops, it was not many people learned and had an opportunity at college, as old as I am. But in I think it was 1980, Dr. J.P. Worthington took our crops class out to the university farm at Western Kentucky University, and he was planting with a 2 or 4 row planter. I can't remember which, but the Cole was the brand. And we were planting into hairy vetch cover crop for silage corn. So that was my first aha that my gosh, what are we doing here, planting into something like this? So anyway, glad to be here. Hope this sounds like it's going to be a great series, and happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. So I want to encourage everybody to put questions in the Q&A again, because I think you can guide this conversation and how it goes. We have some general questions that I want to ask to start off with, though. And first, I think it's great to hear about that first experience that you had, Barry, and planting into hairy vetch. And so, Steve, I wanted to ask you about what your first experience was like planting into a cover crop or cover crop residue.
Well, the first couple of years we didn't use cover crops in the 1980s, very rarely. Although I do have a picture of 1983 of planting into standing rye. So I guess you could say I was planting green back then, but it wasn't that tall, so it wasn't very difficult. Over the years, though, pretty much I've kind of gravitated toward heavier and heavier cover crops, and learning how to do that is a learning curve. The nice thing about today is there are a lot of equipment options out there, and sometimes there's so many options you don't know where to start. And so you have to kind of match your expertise and sometimes your pocketbook. But you know what's ironic about the use of cover crops is we kind of went through this stage, and it's kind of a trend among farmers. We got all these residue cleaners and all these different gadgets and stuff we can hang in our planter. And now a lot of us are taking them off, actually going back to no coulters, no row cleaners even sometimes. I don't have a coulter in my planter. I do have row cleaners. I do feel that they have a value from time to time. So it's kind of interesting to see the ebb and the flow, and it all has to do a lot about how machinery is made these days in the context of being able to function in a cover crop system.
So I guess maybe, to follow up on that, just that there's so many different pieces of equipment and, maybe Barry, you can answer this one as to what piece of equipment do you start with when you're looking at planting into these systems, reducing tillage, using cover crops? Where do you start and what is the primary piece of equipment you need to consider first?
Well, this sounds strange, but it really starts in the fall. And if you don't have your combine set where you can spread the crop residues evenly, and including the chaff spread evenly across the header width, that's where it all begins, and that allows you to get your cover crop established evenly. And if your cover crop is a good solid stand that's established evenly, then at least whatever you decide to do in the spring, you're going to be planting into a more consistent environment. And so consistency is everything in planting. And if you can start in the fall in a consistent environment by how you spread your residues, and then how you establish your cover crop, then you've at least got a good chance. Now you've got a good chance to know where to set, how to set. Your depth on your planter can stay consistent, and the settings on your planter can be more consistent. So I start in the fall, or I try to get producers to think in the fall as far as they're starting this system.
So Barry, you're in the land of big equipment. What size header is too big, and where's the sweet spot for the header size to get a good even spread?
Well, technology has finally caught up with the header width. So we now, if the producer knows they need to, they can get residue spreading devices, no matter what brand. Just about every brand now has the capability, if you know what tail spreading device to order, you can get it all the way out to the 40-foot heads for sure. And there comes a point where you can only throw a feather so far, and this residue is light. But the fans and the air movement that they've got on a lot of these machines, we can do a really good job. But it's not just spread the full width, but it's spread evenly across the full width. And so, I know Steve and I have both been on programs and been to conferences where I'm a big fan of Phil Needham. Does a good job of going through how to spread residues, and he has a really nice systematic approach that he works with producers on spreading. So I refer to him a lot, especially on the really big machines.
Okay, that's good to know. And if we stick with, I kind of like this idea, maybe we'll go through the season from the fall through into the spring and management that way with your equipment. And so Steve, what do you have to add for that kind of residue management in the fall that sets you up for success?
Well, I think Barry alluded to it, getting even residue spread, and then that in turn directly affects the ability to get your cover crops seeded correctly so you have even emergence. And I'm going to say my famous quote here. You need to treat your cover crops like your cash crops. And if that solves so many issues, if you just think that way. And that's just the case in point there. You have to get the cover crop seed in the ground. And I'm going to stay in the fall a little bit here. Another thing to add, one thing I found, and I'm going to say it's a little trick, because the soil temperatures are generally warmer in the fall, you can plant your cover crop seeds deeper than you may think. And that gets a cleaner cut, a cleaner slice with your coulters, your openers to get your cover crop planted. The only exception is if you're planting some small seeds like crimson clover, there's a limit. But if you're going with the normal grains, even like soda rye, you can plant that 2 inches deep and it'll come up. And I've seen this time and time again. It's kind of like nowadays we're planting corn deeper than we used to for pretty much the same reason. But then we're usually dealing with cold soils. Here we're dealing with warm soils. And actually sometimes in later planting, the soil is warmer at 2 inches than it is at 1 inch. And so just understanding that is a little trick to get a better stand to plant deeper within reason. So that's, I guess, going to be my tip of the fall planting.
Okay, perfect. And we have our first question coming in from Vicky. If we could offer some ideas to maximize the evenness of the spread of residue with equipment modifications, so you don't need to buy a piece of expensive equipment. Is there something that you can do without that massive purchase to get good spread?
Yeah. I mean, I never had a really expensive, my combine, not expensive. So every combine, whether you're using a chopper or just the paddles, whether it's, different brands tend to favor those. There are adjustments. Of course, the fins on a chopper, you've got to spread them wider, sharp knives. Really, the chaff spreaders are not a very expensive piece of equipment. Those can be added on where just the small materials dumping out the back, and there's a chaff spreader that can hook right into your hydraulics. Almost all combines have that capability at a relatively inexpensive cost. And within some of the green combines, for example, there's even some fins inside that you can adjust to get that material started onto the chopper. And I wish I could probably call up a picture or two someplace if we had that. But we've got farmers coming on in the next few weeks, and they can probably talk about exactly and maybe show some pictures of that. But there's fins inside that really help you as it comes, out of the cylinder and to get it started onto the chopper really well. So sharp knives, spread the fins, get a chaff spreader. Those are all very easy adjustments and very inexpensive add-ons that really get you going in the right direction.
And I want to follow up with that, Barry, is wind sometimes can be an enemy. So this is where the art of farming has to come back in. A lazy combine operator won't want to do this, but sometimes if you have a crosswind, you can adjust those fins, and you'll have to just do that. I don't know if there's anything automated to account for wind yet, but you have to think about what you're doing and look back there, see how is the chaff actually spreading. Ideally, sometimes it's nice to have someone to follow the four-wheeler a little while or something to tell you. But again, these are the little tricks of the trade. Sometimes it can make the difference between good and great. And we want to be great in all we do. So consider the wind, especially in your small grains, and more so than in corn or maybe even soybeans. So it's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's great to keep in mind. I mean, I live in the Northern Plains. It is always windy. But what if there's, somebody on this webinar that they've spread the residue already, they're thinking about the spring and planting into it, and maybe they're saying, oh man, I don't have the best residue spread, and I are there some ways to save this situation so that they could still plant into it without doing some tillage, or is there some shallow tillage that they should do? And maybe we'll start with Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to say my first thought in that is row cleaners. This is where they can come in and help if you have areas. And I'm going to also say, if you have row cleaners or considering to get them, I will never go back to lock down row cleaners, even floating. But the ones that you can adjust from the tractor cab, to me, that's the science. I mean, that's the art of planting, because there are times where you want a little more aggressive in parts of the field for whatever reason, them row cleaners. Other times you want to lift them up. We live in hilly Pennsylvania, and sometimes in our end rows, we don't want to use row cleaners because they're washed out, even in no-till. So those are just simple things. And if you have an area where the combine, wasn't quite set right, and you need when you're planting through that area, put your row cleaners down a little more to clean that row off. I mean, it's all about, sometimes it's not necessarily cleaning the row off. It's better said to get an even planting depth, whatever you set at. So these are, again, some of the little nuances, and these are great questions, by the way. So that would be my quick answer to, trying to do the Band-Aid approach or the rescue treatment, so to speak, is use row cleaners to your advantage.
Okay, great. And you mentioned down pressure. And so maybe Barry, I'll ask this one to you on, the down pressure settings or downforce. how do you figure that out for your field? Do you need to adjust it midfield? You know, what are your recommendations in that part of the scenario?
Yeah, that's why having consistent stand of cover crops, consistency really helps you out. But still, the soils can change and the undulation of your field. You know, Steve and I are in pretty rolling landscapes, and as you go up and over a field, if you don't have that floating capability to your row cleaner, you know, even if you don't have the dollars to invest in the downforce where you can adjust downforce from your cab, as a minimum, try to lean toward those floating row cleaners so that as you go over a hill, the floating it doesn't pull it into the soil and dig a trench for you. So you have to use a floating row cleaner. I like the kind of the shark tooth kind of ones because they don't wrap as bad with and they're really sharp, so they can move and help you with the cover crop residue and things like that. But there's generally enough weight to that floating row cleaner to handle most conditions if you without digging too deep, you know. And you can always set the down limit on even the floating ones. There's a you can always, you know, there's an adjustment where you can set the down limit so you never want it to gouge too deep because you don't want to move your warmest, most fertile soil away from the seed trench. You want to try to move residue and obstacles, like Steve said, so that your gauge wheels that are determining your depth of your planting, so that they're riding on a smooth tabletop surface if you can. And so your row cleaners are serving kind of a couple of purposes there, but it is all about setting the stage so that your gauge wheels can give you the best depth control possible.
And I'll add one thing. There's these things called treader wheels, or that's what I know them as, like an inch and a half, 2 inch wide that go bolt on the outside. It keeps the unit from gouging in too deep, but also, someone else told me this, and I kind of think it's true. In heavy cover crops, it kind of helps to push the cover crop down a little bit more. And I don't know if that's a thing or not, but I wouldn't go without those treader wheels if you have row cleaners. That's just my personal opinion. And I will say now that what Barry and I share today, there could be some exceptions to that. We're sharing from our experience, and if anyone says that what we say is wrong, well, that may be correct actually. That they're right, and because if everybody has to find out their sweet spot, what works in their situation. But I will say, I think Barry and I are pretty much right for a lot of this for a lot of people. So I just want to kind of give that caveat out there. If you have a better idea, good for you, and if it works, good for you. Maybe we should know about it. But there are some situations where certain dynamics, what we're talking about here, work specifically for a certain farmer, and maybe not others.
Yeah, I like that
say-
point too.
I would second that.
So, I mean, we're kind of in the springtime right now because we're talking about planting into residue, and you're kind of on probably a climatic gradient, Barry, where you may be a little bit drier, and Steve, you've got more humidity and more moisture. Is there a time of day, right, that you're planting into this residue that makes it easier or more difficult? How patient do you have to be? And maybe we'll start with Barry.
Yeah, it does. When you've got all this residue, having the dew off is better, if that's possible. Now, it just kind of depends on, you know, what is that cover? Are you planting green? Are you planting into dead residue? What, you know, that changes also. But as a general rule, yes, it would be nice, but I'll be the first to say that a lot of guys can't wait till all of the dew leaves, you know, but they're just not going to give up that much of the day. So what that means then is conditions can change during the day. And there's kind of this point during the morning, you know, around 10 o'clock that the dew starts lifting, that things can change rapidly. So you want to make sure, get off and take a look at your planter as that condition changes, and from a heavier dew to when the dew actually does lift. But most people aren't going to wait till the dew's gone. But yes, that would be wonderful if we could. Things tend to work better when it's really dry. So
Yeah, you mentioned planting green, and I think maybe we'll go to Steve on this one because I've seen you planted some pretty tall green stuff in your field. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that approach too.
Well, planting green is when we're planting into a cover crop that hasn't been terminated or just was recently terminated, and you'll terminate it soon after planting. And it has its own set of challenges, and it's not for the person who's just jumping into this topic. I'll just say that right away. You got to have the right equipment. You can have things tangled up in your planter that you never thought about before. There's frustrating things, I'm telling you, they're out there. But if you talk to someone else who's done it, that's again where I'm going to say you need to find a mentor for doing the stuff that you would like to do. Find someone who is actually doing it, what you want to do. So that's kind of a background information here. So the thing about planting green is sometimes it can stay wetter longer in the morning because there's just more residue standing up there. But I think now with the planters we have, the good technology, and it's like Barry said, and we all know as farmers, you just can't wait. When the ground is fit, when the soil's fit, you got to go. And I'd be one to say, yeah, you can pace yourself based on weather forecasts and what you have to do yet, of course. But I'm also going to say one other thing that's kind of cool about planting green, at least, somewhat without cover crops, but in the context of cover crops, is if it starts raining, you can keep going. I've my record, and again, you want to finish up fields. You don't like to mud the whole planter up because then it takes hours to clean. Trust me, I've been there. Sometimes that's worth it just to get it in the ground. But I planted into a 1/4 inch of rain already, and I'm not advising that. That did take some cleaning, but just saying that you can. That's kind of some of the perks. We all know that all the challenges that we have in this system. One of the perks is you don't have to head to the barn in the first sprinkles. You can keep going if you want to finish the field or just get more in the ground. So planting green is another level of management. That could be a whole topic in itself. But that has its advantages and also challenges, but it's all about education. There's enough people doing it that it can be done. So you just got to learn.
That's good advice to find a mentor on something like that, because it could be really challenging to plant green your first time, and you may need to call somebody to find out if you've got everything set right or just to set your mind at ease. So that's great advice. But I think there's also an opportunity for termination, right? I mean, if you don't want to plant green, and maybe Barry, you could talk about this, is, when is the right time to terminate? And does it matter based on the crop that you're planting into that cover crop?
It does matter what your cash crop is that you're getting ready to plant. And so I've planted green, both corn and soybeans, but I tend to, if I'm planting corn into green covers, then that's usually younger covers that I'm willing to plant into. If I plant green into soybeans, then I can let that go all the way to almost anthesis without any major problems. I can plant soybeans into that taller cover crop, but and that's, and I'll say this at this point, the beauty that one of the advantages that, Steve and I are talking about what we've done on our own place, but both he and I have had an advantage that we spend a lot of time on a lot of farms across the country, as probably you have, Abby. So we get to share in the innovation of all those farmers and integrate it back into our own kind of understanding of how we're going to manage. But planting in the spring, you do have to be kind of a game time manager in that you got to read the weather forecast, read the soil conditions. A good example was this spring where, we came out of a very dry fall, a dry winter, a cold snap, and then it turned dry and warm all at once. And we were watching it, but like a group of us that talk a lot right around here in West Central Indiana, the texts were flying crazy, said, man, the soil's drying out. What are you guys going to do? You normally like to let my cover crop get a little bit bigger, but I'm not seeing any rain in the forecast, and the soil looks like it's really good to plant. And kind of the crowdsourced consensus that we developed was time to go. And when that soil tells you it's time to plant, you still have that cash crop, and it's time to plant. If you're used to planting green, the beauty is the first day when it's really good to plant, it might be that you still have a green cover crop out there, but you're confident that you're going to be able to get it terminated without any heartburn, and then you go ahead and plant when conditions are right and terminate immediately thereafter. And so that gives you a flexibility, but you do have to be able to read that season, because if you didn't pull the trigger around here during that time frame, you might have missed that rain that happened the first week of May, and you might have been, your seed may have been in dust all the way till clear up into June. So that was a real, use your local network and be a game time decision maker on this when you're getting ready to plant into this kind of cover.
Yeah.
I'd like to just provide a little color commentary, because everything you said, Barry, was perfect, right on. I think sometimes we as farmers and those of us in this space, we kind of pigeonhole things as black and white. Oh, you want to leave your cover crop grow as long as possible. Well, there are exceptions to the rules, and I like your terminology, our game time decisions, or whatever you said. I like that. So I like to look at it this way. We have this 10-year plan that we're going to leave our covers grow as long as possible, but we have to micromanage sometimes. And that's exactly what Barry was talking about. You kind of earn the right by your soil building over 10 years, or in that 10-year context, to make maybe a less than preferred decision in the context of 10 years. But when you have an exception to the rule, you have to do that, because we got to get the crop out of the ground. So there again, I'm going to say you earned the right to make that decision to terminate earlier, because the dryness is now the most important thing that you have to figure. So, that again, I will say one more thing in the whole thing of moisture. The longer you're into a soil health system, the more forgiving it is. And you could maybe, stretch it a couple more days before you have to terminate it. So, and that's a guessing game. It's basically, I call it the art of farming. And we have to make these decisions because you don't know if it's going to rain or not. We know 10-day forecast, it's kind of gives us an idea, and we have to manage on that. So all these things are just the art of farming, and we have to just understand it that way. So moisture management is critical in determining cover crop termination. On the flip side, I don't know if you want to get into this, Abby, but when it's wet, then the cover crop can help us in a very dramatic way by helping to dry out the soil. So I'll just leave that at that. Well, maybe one thing, make sure we cover. Just if it's wet, make sure you don't terminate that cover crop before you can get the field planted. So there again, that's management, because if you have 1,000 acres and you want to get it all sprayed to terminate, and you get 500 acres planted and it rains an inch or two, you're screwed for a month, pretty much, because that cover crop is now not going to dry out because it's dying and decaying and going down. So there again, you have to, whatever it means, just plant, spray after you plant. That's one way, or just spray or terminate if that's what you're doing, or rolling, which I'm imagining we might talk about in a second. But anyway, so just a little bit of advice there on management there of the moisture.
Yeah, it sounds like in some ways to just not overthink the system, but to use your gut, right? To know what you feel is right or what you're comfortable with too. And maybe there's some element of that to this whole strategy. So I think, another piece that needs to be managed, this is a question that came up in the Q&A, is about fertilizer management. And especially we're thinking of cover crops taking up nutrients from the soil, or I've heard a lot with rye with nitrogen tie-up and not making it available for the next year's crop. So how does fertilizer management change in these systems? And then do you need to consider things like side dressing, or other ways, maybe even equipment modifications that you could use, or equipment that you may use to do your fertilizer? And we'll go back to Barry.
Yeah, I've seen probably more yield loss across people trying to integrate cover crops and no-till, especially when it's integrated both together, from a conventional system. I've seen more yield loss by a lack of understanding on the change that happens in the nutrient cycle. And so we have to adapt our nutrient management, especially nitrogen, and especially, of course, for corn. But we know that over half of the total nutrients that makes it into that corn crop, especially nitrogen, is going to come from the mineralization in the soil, the biology in the soil, the biological delivery. And so if we've planted this cover crop out there that is very competitive for that particular nutrient, or basically most of the soluble mineralized nutrients in the spring of the year, then we might need to change our timing. And of course, the easiest thing that we talk about a lot, and this is particularly more important as in the early stages of transition into this system, because your cycling isn't happening as rapidly yet. And so we talk about the importance of having starter fertilizer, especially the capability to put considerable amount of your nitrogen up front through starter fertilizer band on your planter is the easiest way to be absolutely sure you can put it exactly where you need it in relation to the seed, and take care of that early seed growth and that early. Don't let there be an early nitrogen deficiency out there, because that cover crop did what it was supposed to do. It was scavenging those nutrients up, not letting them get away from you. So it did what it's supposed to do. However, your corn crop is still going to want it, and you might have to move some of your nitrogen closer to planting time in this situation. And sulfur is always a good component to put with that too. We always advise thiazole or something like that with the nitrogen in your starter fertilizer. So that's critical. And I would suggest that it's not just cereal rye that causes that, any of the grasses, but I would even suggest that even legume cover crops have a lot of the mineralized nitrogen in them at that early growth stage. Now you're going to get some really good stuff back later for when the rapid uptake is there, but it may or may not be readily available, because that cover crop still has a lot of soluble nutrients in it right at the time of termination. And so depending on the weather, that doesn't just release automatically really quick.
Yeah, so I think, well, Steve, I would love for you to add on this, because I feel like the nutrient management is really critical, and maybe you could talk too about some of the saves that you may have had to do, right? If if the nutrients are tied up too much, what have you had to do to modify that system and save it?
Yeah, I'm just thinking here, this is another topic for a whole an hour sometime, but you know, everything, I agree with everything Barry said. And again, for those who are listening today that you may be a little new to the party, when you put cover crops as another management layer, everything changes. And then that's kind of the bottom line thing here, but everything you do changes, and you have to understand that. Not dramatically some, but you have to understand the nuances. So as in cover crops, you know, we typically have legumes that can provide some nitrogen. We have grasses that tie it up. Both of those things are very good traits, but you have to learn how to manage them. When do they tie it up? When do they release it? And Barry talked about that. And I'm going to say something here that a lot of farmers don't want to do, but they should. And that is put check strips out. Because we can talk here all day about our theories and what we've seen, but your farm, the nuances of your farm can be slightly different. And I like to put this out there. Have you calibrated your soils? And what I mean by that is, do you have a 0 nitrogen check plot for your corn? Do you have a 50% of what you normally do? Do you have 100% like you normally do? All that there can then help you better understand how this works. And now with yield monitors and GPS and everything, it's not that hard to do. I mean, you run this over 1,000 acres, and if you can save, you know, $30 an acre or even $15 an acre, it adds up. So having your own check strips is really the best way to do it, the best way to answer these questions. But yeah, are the grasses, they tie it up. Now, when they give it back is a factor of two things. One thing was alluded to already, the biologically, how biologically alive are your soils? You have a highly active soil, a lot of microbes and critters and everything. They're going to start chewing up your decaying cover crop residue and make it available to your crop. Even cereal rye before boot stage, a lot of that will become available to your crop during the summer. But from boot stage of cereal rye to anthesis is like 2 weeks. And then to the latter part of that, hardly, maybe very little of that will be available to that crop because of the seed to end ratio is so high, the critters can't break it down to release it. Now it'll be there later on. And after you do this a couple years, it starts adding to the pool of available nitrogen. That's what the goal we all want to have. But you have to understand how this stuff works. And it's so, what I've seen in my farm here, now I'm in Pennsylvania, 42 inches annual rainfall. So you got to know that, but it never happens evenly, by the way, from month to month to month, but that's our average rainfall. And, you know, if we have a wetter year, that's going to decompose quicker, drier year, less. So you have all these variables, some we can't even control. So that's why I feel get some nitrogen on with the planter, except if you have 100% legume, I don't use nitrogen on my planter, 100% legume. I'm not, I mean, Barry made a good point. Sometimes those legumes, you know, have some nitrogen tied up until they start releasing it. But, you know, little nitrogen on the planter, and then get your fertility on earlier rather than later. And then you're just going to have to test from there on. That's the best answer I can give, because there's so many scenarios represented here. You're going to have to evaluate your situation. If you're going to do, you know, precision nitrogen management, I could give you a prescription here today. We all could, but that's probably going to be wrong for your farm. So you're going to have to take some responsibility in figuring this out.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we have another question here too that's going to take us back to the combine in the fall, and looking at weed seeds and your residue management. So Nick was asking if there's any experience in the Midwest with hammer mills on combines. And I don't know, Barry, if you want to take this one, and maybe we could talk a little bit about weed management in these systems as well.
I don't have any direct experience with hammer mills. Of the technologies I've seen, though, that seems to have a lot of play as far as especially if you're operating in an area, maybe you've picked up a new farm and maybe you've got just you're inheriting a lot of weed, especially herbicide resistant weeds or something like that. Then getting rid of that weed bank would be really nice. But I'll just say that I'll just say this, and I bet Steve's going to say the same thing. But when I've had now, and I talked to all my friends that are in the same situation, same kind of a system, with continuous cover crops and continuous no-till, I don't have a weed bank that I'm really all that worried about. So weed control just gets so much easier, especially with cereal rye and a good stand of cover crop every year, and then you're no-tilling, so you're not really bringing up any old seed banks or hard seeds from before. So weed control gets a lot easier when you're in this system for a long time. And it's just that even those herbs, I mean, the greatest thing about cereal rye, all the weed scientists talk about multiple modes of action, and you should. However, one of the best modes of action to make sure you have in there is that cover crop, and that competition from the cover crop, the allelochemicals that are produced by the cover crop. That's your other modes of action to add in there to really improve your weed control. And it just kind of goes away. I do like a lot of there's new technologies that are going to be coming out that, you know, they're even using light spectrums on the back of combines. There's just all this new technology that's going to help us with weed control, especially these herbicide weed resistant weeds and things that are going to be integrated into that combine system. But for a lower input producer, get that cover crop out there, get a good stand of cover crop, learn how to manage cover crops and no-till, and weed control becomes much easier.
Yeah, I hope that sets some minds at ease. It's nice to think about weed control becoming easier using different practices, and probably tricking Mother Nature in some ways as you make that shift of what you're doing to trick the system. So there is a question again, Vicky, thank you for asking a couple questions in here. I really appreciate it. What aspects of this with weed control and the cover crops can we incorporate into organic? And Steve, I don't know if you have organic practices on your farm, but I'm thinking possibly with some vegetable production, but maybe you could answer this one.
Well, I'm going to have to answer this way. I'm not organic. That being said, I don't want to be arrogant, but I like to say I'm beyond organic. And I don't want to, that's not divisive. I'm just, that my goal is to even eliminate some of the organic sides that are out there, if you will. But as far as organic, cover crops, it's the organic tension is always, you're going to use tillage or herbicides, for weed control. Obviously, you can't use herbicides in organic. That being said, there are several companies in the process working toward that goal. And if that does occur, that could help organic folks out tremendously. But I have started rolling in 1996. And the irony of my reason for starting to roll was to reduce the cost of glyphosate. Because back then, cost of glyphosate was like $50 a gallon. And I was able to bring it down. I tried without any herbicide, and I could do it sometimes, but it wasn't consistent. The thing of it is it's impossible to grow the perfect crop, the perfect cover crop every field every year. It's just impossible. I've been doing this for a long time, and I can't do it every single year. So that's my weed control for organic. So you're going to have to fall back on some other options. The other thing is timing. A lot of times you want to plant your cash crop before your cover crop is mature enough to do the weed control that it needs to be. So there's different methods out there. There's some mowing, there's some in-row rolling now. I firmly believe that this is going to get easier for the organic community, just like it got easier for those of us who started 40 years ago. I mean, 40 years ago, we were kind of on our own. Very little equipment options out there for everything we're talking about today. And now today, there's so many options, we're confused. So to answer the question, there's not a specific answer unless I would hear a specific situation. We don't have time for that today. I would just say, keep thinking. We need you. We need you. We need everybody, because I'm sure there are farmers on the call here and researchers that have some answers here that maybe that Barry and I don't know, or Abby doesn't know. So I just feel like the community, we need to hang together here. And that's why I say mentors. We all need to have our mentors. Barry mentioned the group he's with. I'm with several groups. That has been invaluable. And going to some conferences and meeting people that share similar goals, all that helps answer these questions. So that's just my response right now without getting very specific.
Yeah, no, I can hear a lot of that networking that both of you have coming through your answers, because they are very, they're just very consistent, right? And what I've seen across multiple operations. And so again, with the caveat that these are your experiences or maybe from your farm, but they do have this element that I think could be applied, or at least a starting point for growers in any system, right? To then figure out what works for them and do their test strips and manipulate that system so that it works with their operation. And there's a question here, Barry, that I think is a follow-up for you on from Chris on how long of implementing cover crops did it take for you to see that weed control solution?
It's back to that. Steve called it a journey early on. Just when you think you've got it all completely controlled, then something else will come along, like water hemp. We were so happy that we had mare's tail completely under control, and it was just no longer a problem. And then here comes water hemp. Okay, and then Palmer amaranth. Now we fortunately never did get Palmer amaranth, but I'm not saying something won't come along, but at the end of the day, the better job that you can do all the way across, you still have to have a solid weed control strategy that is multifaceted, in my opinion. I still I try to limit my herbicide use as much as possible, but you still might have to use different products at different times. Still use glyphosate as a burn down and 2,4-D at that same time, but might use different traded crops to answer certain questions, but along the way, but getting that good cover crop out there when possible, that extra competition, that extra cover, those chemicals that are produced by those, especially cereal rye, but annual ryegrass helps too, and hairy vetch can help too, and some of those other. There's a lot of cover crops and cover crop combinations that help that, but it makes, if you still have to use chemistry, it will make that chemistry work so much better. If you can hold those weeds to a smaller growth size for your crop canopies, crop canopy is part of your weed control. So if the cover crop helps hold everything down so that if you are going to make one herbicide application, now you're applying to it those weed sizes that the label says you're supposed to apply to, instead of letting it get it, those 3 foot tall, 4-inch the applications. They're trying, it's much easier to go ahead and do the best job with chemistry, and that combination holds everything in check and helps with the journey, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. We're getting close to the end of this, which it feels like this has been a time warp, and it's gone really, really fast with all these great questions and all of your knowledge being shared. And so I want to get back to the equipment and make sure that we covered what you both feel we need to have covered on the equipment. And Steve, is there anything that we missed on equipment or settings or usable, approaches that will help?
Well, I want to emphasize that we had mentioned early on about planting a little deeper. Along with that is you have to get out of the tractor and go behind that planter and see where the seeds are going. We haven't mentioned hairpinning, where you push the residue down and it doesn't cut, and there's a seed down there, and especially if it gets dry, that seed won't germinate, or it'll be delayed or whatever. This is a common mistake that farmers don't take enough time. I had someone tell me once, and this is what I want to share. You need to think your first round in a field is your time is worth $1,000 an hour. All right? Your time is worth $1,000 an hour in at least that first round, because it literally could be. And to get back and look and to see, is the seed getting in the ground without hairpinning? I actually got frustrated with these. Well, I actually have a tool right here. This is one of those little seed things that you can dig. This isn't good enough. I like these. I carry a trowel in my planter, and I literally dig a foot or two along the row at the depth right beside the row. And peel away, and I want to see the seeds laying there, because I want to look, is there any hairpinning? And actually how deep they are. I mean, that's just another step to making sure you're getting the seed in the ground. You can't change that. You got one chance to put that seed in the ground, and you want your planter to get it done right. And it comes back to, sometimes I'll just say that planting through cover crops, it's more management to do that, and you're just gonna have to get off. And now, granted, once you get the hang of it, I'm not saying you have to get off every single field. If you know it's similar, you can go and you'll get confident. Just don't get cocky. So that would be one thing I'd like to reemphasize. Get off the tractor and go back and look and dig and find the seeds. It's worth a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Steve. And Barry, is there anything we missed, or do you want to address, even more of the hairpinning, because that is such a huge issue, and ways around that on equipment modifications or equipment maintenance to reduce that?
Yeah, just know that in this no-till system, just when in doubt, change your coulters and your double disc opener, so that you've got good double disc openers that are set right and have a good cutting edge. So you've got to do that. But then the other thing that we have not talked about, and there's just a lot of different closing wheels, and you are closing, if you're planting into cover crops, you are planting with, especially green, there can be this entanglement of roots and things like that. And so there's just so many options on closing devices. Just go to field days, local workshops where people and have maybe put different devices on the back for your soils and your conditions. But as a general rule, what I've moved to is a closing wheel that has its own weight. In other words, has the ability to have its own weight and maybe a sharp edge, planting green, having something that has the ability to kind of knead that soil back together so that that root mass is, we're still getting it closed. But I want the weight of that closing wheel to help me, because if I'm totally reliant on spring tension, then I'm working against my parallel linkage. That leverage that's back there at the back of the planter can work against your parallel linkage, your down pressure that you're depending on for depth control. So I want my closing wheels to have their own weight to do most of the job. And that's just a general, there's a lot of options out there, but that's just a general advice that I give, especially for those that are interested in planting a pretty heavy cover crop residue or planting green.
Oh, well, I appreciate all this advice. I feel like maybe we need to ask Olivia and the group to schedule us for another webinar because there's so many more questions, and there's some that we didn't get to from Jason and Tayaba and Nick also. So I apologize we didn't get to your questions, but it sounds like you can join a webinar in the future and maybe ask those same questions of a different couple of farmers with all this experience. So yeah, this is really fun to moderate. Thank you both for such thoughtful answers and bringing in all that experience from multiple farms, not just your own, to this, but then again, making that clarification that this is somewhat specific, you know, that there are other solutions and people should continue to look for answers from multiple sources as well. So with that, I think we'll turn it back to Olivia.
Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful to sit in. I've learned a lot. It's been great to hear from you all. And thank you to everyone for joining our webinar. It's been a wonderful discussion. I'm really grateful for Abby, Barry, and Steve joining us today to learn more about equipment considerations and cover crop systems. Once you close out of this webinar, a short survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate your feedback. As mentioned earlier, next week, we are going to be joined by Ryan Britt, and he is going to be discussing his equipment setups out of Missouri. We'd really appreciate you joining. Aaron went ahead and dropped the link in the chat where you can register for our upcoming webinars. And then also we are offering CEU credits. There's 1 credit per webinar. You can scan this QR code or email me at oliviacaillouette@missouri.edu by the end of the day, and I can get you signed up for that credit. And then last, there will be a follow-up email after the end of this webinar that'll include links to these recordings where you can go back and review all this great information that we've heard. There will also be a final follow-up survey and additional links if there's anything that we touched on that we want to include in that email. And with that, we have our contact information here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining.